Hello, agus falcha, is mi Brown. That is my estimation of my given name in Scottish Gaelic, or Gaelic as it's known within the language itself. I'm making this impromptu video as a sort of channel introduction for this channel named Taurus at present. It's November 8th, 2021, and we're in the wee hours of the morning. And I think this will probably serve as my channel intro until I make something a little bit more focused and appropriate for when I start really posting content. Taurus is Taurus is a Gaelic word that I believe means journey. And I've chosen the name because I feel in some sense that that's what and if you're watching this as well, hopefully you are embarking on the journey with me. I kind of made this video as just to get this kind of stream of consciousness essay out of my head instead of having it just pour out of me in any online meetings I have. Because I've attended some meetings where I'm excited and some of this stuff just pours out and it ends up taking up other people's time, and I don't want to do that. I began learning Gaelic, I think, in the winter of 2019 and kind of into the transition into 2020. Around the time I became aware that Duolingo had launched their Scottish Gaelic course, that it was being developed, and I think it was in beta at the time. I'd only been vaguely aware that such a language existed before they announced that. Maybe if you had asked me what the ancient language of Scotland was, I might have answered Gaelic, but I wouldn't have known much else about it. So I hope you'll stay here with me as I give a somewhat condensed version of what was happening in my life then and where it's brought me to at the present moment. I graduated from the University of South Florida in 2018. I was a late blooming overage student, and I got a bachelor's degree in what amounts to Russian studies. As a result of some political events in the United States happening around the time I chose the major, and especially as a result of kind of how those things were reflected in our media culture, I decided that before I made any serious decisions about taking up a career, working for the State Department, or I think at the time I was maybe 31, 32 years old, still maybe had some time to join the Navy, go through OCS, or, get some kind of job in the military. I decided that I would try to go to Russia and try to live there for a little while and kind of experience what it's like on the ground level instead of straining it all through, what the media says about Russia and not just the media, and just the kind of general popular consciousness. So in the summer of 2019, I believe it was, in the summer of 2019, I was contacted by an acquaintance I had made at USF several years before with an offer to teach English in Russia. After several phone conversations about the particulars of the job, I decided that would be a good way to improve my command of the language via immersion. I could learn about the culture and the society and the politics kind of on the ground level, talking to real people. And I could make some money while I was doing it, as opposed to working a job, saving up money, going on vacation, only being in the place for a few weeks and not really having long-term, authentic insights about what it felt like to be in the culture. So, there was one particularly cold evening in Yekaterinburg. I decided to organize my Google Chrome bookmarks. I hadn't done so in a couple of years, and it was pretty chaotic. Couldn't find a lot of things that I was looking for. So I started organizing them, and I stumbled upon a bookmark I could not remember saving. And it was a website detailing something about a work released in the latter half of the 18th century, centered on an ancient heroic figure named Ossian. And it seemed like something I'd really be interested in. The first work in any of my literature or humanities classes that ever really got me enthusiastically interested in learning in school had been the Iliad. And here was something like it that had a kind of tangential connection to my Scottish heritage. And I kind of thought, well, maybe, I can design some English lessons around it, because it was poetry, and I kind of I thought, I've never really understood poetry, and sometimes they say the best way to learn something is to figure out how to teach it and actually teach people, because you learn what the gaps in your knowledge are. So the relation to my Scottish heritage was also pretty important, So I remembered that my mom had told me when I was younger that her grandparents had used a novel called The Scottish Chiefs as a kind of means of instructing and passing on to her and her siblings about what our Campbell ancestors had done in the history of Scotland, and to show that these were important people. And it turned out that we had a copy of the Scottish Chiefs with an old bookmark in it, and this old leather bookmark that belonged to, I think, my great grandmother. And I think the book had belonged to her too, but it turns out it's a romance novel that I found very difficult to read. It was a little bit dry, a little bit melodramatic, and just frankly, I just didn't have any interest in it. But in any case, I thought this Ossian might be a good subject to introduce my English students to kind of a corner of the English literary world that a lot of native speakers would really know about. We didn't study anything even close to this. Maybe some people in the United States somewhere, maybe they had read something by Walter Scott or something like that, but we hadn't been exposed to that. But it could also set me apart as an English teacher. It's a very competitive field. A lot of teachers are offering the same kind of lessons, and you really kind of you have to find a niche sometimes to sell something in a really competitive field. And if you're familiar with the work of, I hope I say his name right, Seth Godin, I read at least part of his book, like the Purple Cow, where you come up with this really novel, crazy looking idea, and you just kind of develop this niche that people will really kind of rush in and kind of be enthusiastic about. So it also, I thought, would kind of give my students some confidence, and they could actually tell other people who were learning English and native speakers that they met, they would have a sort of expertise, a little advantage about this little corner of English literature that could really bolster their confidence in communicating. So as I investigated the work further and the circumstances surrounding its creation and its popularity, I found myself a little more confused and bewildered about this thing more than inspired by it, because this Ossian turned into a whole phenomenon, and in some quarters it's celebrated as being a sort of like influence on and kind of a proto-romanticist work, because like influenced Goethe, and Napoleon supposedly kept a copy of it, and Thomas Jefferson was really taken with it, which are, these are not small names. But the more I investigated, it turned out that it was this continental European literary scandal. James McPherson, the supposed kind of author/translator of the work, was variously talked about as a genius as well as a plagiarist, or that the whole thing was a forgery. And I may make a video about the whole thing, because it is kind of an interesting topic, and there's a lot of good reasons why it's worth talking about, because I don't think it's widely known. So at the same time, I'd taken up Duolingo, and I was progressing in Duolingo. I had done the same thing to help me learn Russian, which I found for that purpose a little bit of a digression, but I found it was useful for typing, and then at some point it seemed to fall off in usefulness, because translating what I was doing in Duolingo I couldn't really translate it effectively into into, my actual working knowledge of Russian. But in any case, there seemed to be underneath this whole Ossian controversy that there was a kind of a troubled history in the Scottish Highlands, and maybe that also intersected with my family history. I remembered my aunt on my dad's side, whose grandfather was from Scotland. Lost my place in my notes here. My aunt on my dad's side had taken a keen interest in Bonnie Prince Charlie, and she used to tell my cousin and I about stories about this grandfather. He had been kind of sent to the United States by his family to keep him out of trouble, because she used to say that, when the Blue Bloods, as she called them, which I think are the landlords, there were certain signs of respect that they expected, and he would spit on the ground instead of, doffing his cap or whatever it was they expected. And he apparently had a tendency to poach, which, as I understand, was as I understood based on what she said, it was a very serious offense. It may have been a very serious offense. I don't quite know. But ultimately, I moved away from my interest in Ossian and towards what I believe to be a more authentic reflection of ancient Highland culture when I stumbled across a speech given by one Michael Newton at what I now believe to be a Tartan Day debate about the authenticity of a lot of symbols of Highland culture that, many of us Americans of Scottish heritage take for granted. That's the tartan, especially the clan tartan, where you want to buy a specific pattern that matches your surname or whatever clan you happen to be from. Bagpipes, Highland games, and all that kind of thing. Since that time, I've taken, I think, one of Michael Newton's classes. I was quite excited about that. I had read some articles that he'd written and seen some other talks he had given, and just thought, what a dream it would be to study with this guy. And I was lucky enough that ended up happening because of, I don't know exactly what reasons he had for doing things the way that he did, but I think partially because of the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns, he really started offering online classes in earnest. So I took Reclaiming the Roots. It's offered through his Hidden Glen Folk School, and I'll try to remember to put in the description a link to the folk school, because I think it's a really valuable resource. He's got a ton of articles in there. But anyways, I also engaged through that in some online ceilidhs. The word ceilidh is, I think it literally means a meeting, but it's kind of a specific kind of meeting. It's a Gaelic word that for these really common communal meetings in Gaelic culture, going back maybe into prehistory. I don't know the farthest back that they're written about, but, for at least 1,000 years, Gaels were meeting together. I would say, based on some of the things that I've read, never really wrote it down, but meeting weekly to share songs and to talk about things that were happening in the community. And a lot of times that happened through songs and poetry. Sometimes impromptu poetry kind of invented on the spot. It's very, very impressive. So a lot of people who are engaged in that community, they call them digital ceilidhs. So I've attended several of those, and they've all been really great. Going forward, I intend to not only investigate further my own family's roots, but also to try to take a hard look at the cultural heritage that we of the Scottish diaspora have kind of been denied. We have these kind of symbols and icons, like the aforementioned tartan and the Highland games, and I understand there's something to do with shortbread, although it never really translated in my family. That aren't really authentic reflections of the culture that we left behind to become Americans and to assimilate and to contribute here. I intend to discover our authentic indigenous roots, that they can't be represented or taken up as symbols of some kind of supremacy, and that they might also bring healing, reconciliation, and justice with other groups and other individuals who've been similarly dispossessed in favor of empire and materialism, even if the thing isn't called an empire. I also intend to plot out some of the materials I found helpful in my personal journey and my personal learning, because there's a lot of them. A lot of them are free, because this Gaelic culture kind of really starts slowing down in its output, at least where there's a lot of things in the public domain. And hopefully in the near future, I can contribute to a living culture of Gaelic that explores contemporary issues, but in the Gaelic idiom, because that's one thing I've heard a lot of people who are, I would say, more immersed or were brought up in this culture, what's left of it anyways, that have said it's very important to have people using the culture in a living way, not having it as some fossilized dead thing where the Gaels are just crofters, but the culture's all gone, and we can only talk about bitterness and being evicted and all these sorts of things. So I think that's about it. I want to thank anyone and everyone who's taken an interest in watching and listening so far. And if you're interested in learning together with me, or you're similarly engaged, either in Gaelic or in your own indigenous heritage investigation, like the video, subscribe to my channel. And I think if you were interested enough to listen so far, I'll have a lot more interesting things to offer.